Alan, you'd be the other candidate.
I met her when she was a graduate student.
But not in history.
But no, but not in history.
Right. So you have me on seniority and I have you on discipline. So your Susan Rosa goes back to the comp lit person who was, if you tell us about that, I'll tell you about their conversion to history.
Well,
Memories?
Yes, I think I hope I had an integral role in that. I met Susan at a conference of the American Society for 18th Century Studies when I discovered that she was the only other person in a room rolling her eyes at the nonsense being asserted. So I immediately introduced myself to her. I was already an established historian, and she was the student of someone she loved very much, Ted Rex, at Berkeley, her mentor, and someone who passed away himself several years ago, but whom she quite adored. And I'm sure a lot of you had the same experience with Susan. We sat down for a drink. And I learned most of her life story that night, and she drew most of mine out of me. And I remember saying to her, and I guess this is what alone gives me seniority, I said, Comp Lit has changed so much between when you started, and she had taken off a very long period of time and then gone back to finish her degree at Berkeley.
Yeah.
I said, you're not going to get a job in Comp Lit. You're an historian. You're an intellectual historian. And I know that I convinced her of that, and that is how she put herself on the job market. And I did introduce her to Zach intellectually. About a year or two later, we were talking on the phone, and I said, how is that working out there for you? And she said, I have the most extraordinary colleagues, and you introduced me to one of the most extraordinary individuals I've known. I love it, she said. I love everything about it. And she was one of a kind. Sui generis, not to a fault. And her wit, her warmth, her empathy stay, I think, with everyone who knew her, and her wisdom.
I thank you very much. I'm not the only person here who encountered her about 20 years ago. The other one's back in the corner there. But I had a more official, I had one of those, chess player roles in getting her from Comp Lit to history. But you had already told her that she was a historian, and you had convinced her. The problem is that she didn't have any credentials. And so, but since I have never pretended to be anything but a kind of, straight up historian, the getting into a graduate seminar, you had to have a PhD to qualify for this, but it didn't have to be in history. So Susan was one of those, she was the exception that proves the rule, that she definitely, no matter what you looked at, this is a woman who must have had a PhD, there's just not, how could she avoid having acquired one? And she was the, I guess it's fair to say, at least it convinced me that she was the outstanding talent in that particular group. And all this it was a wonderful experience. You always, when you run something like an NEH summer seminar, you want to believe that you can help out some people a little bit. Well, I probably helped you out a little tiny bit on that. Yeah, okay. But with Susan's case, it was a huge deal. This was somebody who was remaking herself in a disciplinary way. And I was one of those, maybe I was the single most important transition person saying, okay, you may have walked in here with a PhD in Comp Lit, but I can now vouch for the fact that you are able to hold your own and even sparkle many times in conversations with card-carrying historian. Amen. And then, you know, the old slogan, no good deed goes unpunished. And the consequence of which was I had to help locate a job for Susan in history. And that was a chore, but we both knew it was likely to be so. And I've had the privilege of seeing her when she had a 3-year appointment in Milwaukee, her first decent appointment first appointment in a decent history department, let me put it that way, try to move that adjective around. And there was a time I remember Susan having something that hasn't been mentioned yet, a harpsichord.
Oh.
It was by far the, you know, there were cookbooks, yes, but but somehow my memory remembers that, you know, 15 or so years of interval, the harpsichord, and because it was something I didn't associate with her, I guess. Okay, but it was there, and she do have, you know, like she learned languages and so on. She also never played. So I've had a chance to follow her around from there to here. And delighted to find that eventually the way things shook out, my wife had an office at Northeastern right around the corner from Susan's, and so it was almost too cozy to occasionally go by and you know, and hear a presentation. I remember the last time I think I heard her give a presentation, she was warming up on a subject for Queen Christina, and she was going to give a talk in Geneva. That's right. And so since there was a royal invitation because Geneva is where I wrote my PhD a billion years ago and so on, and where I knew the audience almost better. So I've had a chance to watch watch Susan Rosa historian from the point where Alan pushed her into admitting or getting herself to admit that she was one, to the point where the rest of us professionally agreed she was one, and a damn good one. And I am delighted, you know, I'm sorry that it had to end this way, but we'll all go someday. And she did it with style, she did it with class, and as many of you have said, this, you know, we overuse the term somebody being an original, but she was.
She was.
Thank you.
Thank you.